Welcome, my friend. Let everything slow. Before the Space Marines, before the Primarchs who fathered them, before the great legions that conquered the stars, there were the Custodians. They were the first beings the Emperor of mankind made with his own hands, the first sons of his craft, golden warriors shaped one by one to stand at his side. They are the Adeptus Custodes, the 10,000, the Emperor's own bodyguard, the most perfect warriors the Imperium has ever known. And tonight we begin at their beginning, in the dark days of old Earth, when a hidden master set about building the guardians who would never leave him. Tonight we sit with the first sons of the Emperor, the golden ones, made before all the rest. The master who worked in shadow. To understand the Custodes, we must begin with the being who made them, in the age before the Imperium was born. For long ages, the Emperor of mankind worked from the shadows, a being of immense power who guided humanity in secret, never ruling openly, shaping the species across the centuries through influence and quiet intervention. Then came the Age of Strife, the long nightmare when the warp storms cut Terra off from the stars and the world fell into ruin and madness. And in that darkness, the Emperor judged that the time for working in shadow had ended. He stepped forward at last to take Terra by force, to unite the fractured nations of the Cradle World, and to begin the long work of building an empire that would carry humanity to the stars. To conquer Terra, the Emperor needed armies, and he built them. He raised vast human hosts to fight his unification wars, the campaigns that would bring the warring techno-barbarian states of Terra under his single rule. But human armies alone were not enough for what he intended. And so he did something that only he could do. He began to build soldiers, to craft warriors with his own hands and his own science, beings shaped beyond the limits of ordinary humanity, made for war and for loyalty in ways no natural-born soldier could match. The first of these creations were the Custodians. The law is clear on this point, and it matters. The Custodes predate everything. They predate the Space Marine legions. They predate the Primarchs who would father those legions. They were, the law tells us, among the first genetically and psychologically altered creations the Emperor made, coming before even the Thunder Warriors, the brutal shock troops of the Unification Wars. The Golden Ones were the Emperor's first sons, the first beings he shaped from his own craft, made at the very beginning of his open work to build an empire. Arischi, the first, and the discarded. It is worth pausing on the Thunder Warriors, because the contrast between them and the Custodes reveals something about both, and about the Emperor who made them. The Thunder Warriors were the Emperor's shock troops in the Unification Wars, the brutal superhuman soldiers who smashed the techno-barbarian armies of Terra and won him his cradle world. They were mighty, terrible, effective, and they were temporary. The Thunder Warriors were made with flaws built into them, short lifespans, instabilities, weaknesses that meant they would not endure. When the Unification Wars were won, when their purpose was served, the Thunder Warriors were discarded. The law suggests they were culled, removed, the brutal soldiers of conquest set aside once the conquest was complete. They were tools made for a task and put away when the task was done. The Custodes were the opposite, and the Emperor made them so from the start. Where the Thunder Warriors were flawed and temporary, the Custodes were perfect and enduring, made to last, made to remain at the Emperor's side, not for a single war, but for all the ages to come. Where the Thunder Warriors were a weapon to be discarded, the Custodes were a guard to be kept, the permanent and perfected protection of the Master of mankind. The two creations, made in the same early days, show the two things the Emperor could build: the disposable weapon and the eternal guardian. The Thunder Warriors won him terror and were thrown away. The Custodes were made to stay forever. There is a grim foreshadowing in this contrast, the kind that runs all through the history of the Imperium. The Emperor made beings for his purposes and discarded those whose purpose was served. The Thunder Warriors were used and culled. And one wonders, looking ahead at the 10,000 years to come, whether the Custodes, in their eternal vigil over a broken throne, are the kept guardians they believe themselves to be, or merely another of the Emperor's creations whose original purpose has long since passed, remaining at their post out of a loyalty their maker can no longer reward or release. But that is a sorrow for later parts. In the beginning, the difference was clear. The Thunder Warriors were made to be discarded, and the Custodes were made to endure. The making of a custodian. The way a custodian is made sets them apart from everything that came after, and it is the root of what they are. The Space Marines, the Emperor's later and more numerous warriors, are made by a process of mass production. A boy is taken, and the gene seed of a Primarch is implanted in him, organs grown in his body that transform him into a superhuman warrior. The process is the same for every Space Marine of a given legion. The gene seed carrying the template of the Primarch, the warriors stamped from a common mold. Thousands upon thousands of Space Marines could be made this way, each one a copy of the same fundamental design, an army of superhuman soldiers grown from a shared genetic root. The custodians are made another way, and the difference is everything. Each custodian is crafted individually, one at a time, through a bespoke process of genetic and cellular engineering overseen, in the beginning, by the Emperor himself. There is no gene seed, no common template, no mold from which they are stamped. Each one is shaped alone, his body rebuilt through arcane gene alchemies and secret arts, a unique work of the Emperor's craft. Where a Space Marine is one of thousands cut from a pattern, a custodian is a singular creation, made by hand, each one a separate masterpiece of the Emperor's science. This individual making is why the Custodes are superior, even to the Space Marines, in both prowess and resilience. The mass-produced Astartes are mighty, the finest soldiers the galaxy has known. But the Custodes are something more, each one crafted alone to a perfection that mass production could never reach. Warriors of unmatched physical and mental excellence, shaped one at a time by the hand of their maker. They are selected as infants, often from the noble houses of Terra, and remade through the long and careful process into the golden warriors they will become. Each takes years to create. Each is irreplaceable. Each is, in a sense, the Space Marines can never be, a true son of the Emperor, shaped by his own hand. The cost of this making is part of what defines the 10,000. Because each custodian takes so long to craft, because each is a unique and painstaking work rather than one of a mass-produced batch, they can never be many. The Space Marines number in the hundreds of thousands across their many chapters. The Custodes number around 10,000, and that number is woven into their very name, the 10,000, the legend being that they are never meaningfully more or fewer. Every custodian lost is a loss that cannot be quickly replaced, a masterwork that took years to make, gone. This scarcity shapes how they are used. They are held close, reserved, each one too precious to spend freely the way the Astartes are spent in the great battles of the galaxy. The Golden Warriors are few because each is so dear to make, and their fewness is part of their meaning. There is no division of the making by birth or by kind. Recent law confirms that the process that makes a custodian has no inherent restriction, that there are female custodes who serve alongside the male, crafted by the same arts to the same perfection, fighting with no difference in skill or strength. What matters in the making of a custodian is what the Emperor's craft shapes them into, rather than where they came from or what they were born. A perfect guardian, made one at a time, each a singular masterpiece of the art that only the Emperor first commanded. The 10,000 are something other than a bloodline or a brotherhood of common origin. They are a collection of individual perfections, each made alone, united by the single purpose for which they were all crafted. Constantin Valdor. The first and greatest of the custodians was a being whose name runs through the whole of their early history. Constantin Valdor. Valdor was the first Captain General of the Legio Custodes, the title by which the Custodes were known in those early days. He was the Emperor's right hand, the commander of the Golden Warriors, the foremost of the First Sons. Through the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade that followed, Valdor stood at the Emperor's side, leading the Custodian Guard in the battles that shaped the fate of Terra and the galaxy. He was a paragon of loyalty and martial skill, the model of what a custodian was meant to be, the first and the greatest of the 10,000. Valdor's role was unlike any other in the Emperor's service. He was not a general of armies in the ordinary sense, not a conqueror of worlds like the Primarchs would be. He was the guardian, the one whose duty was the Emperor himself, the commander of the warriors whose entire purpose was the protection of their maker. Where the Primarchs and their legions went out to conquer the stars, Valdor and his custodians stood closest to the Emperor, the innermost circle of his protection, the last line between the master of mankind and any who would harm him. There is a quality to Valdor that the law returns to again and again, and it defines the Custodes as a whole, an absolute and incorruptible loyalty. The custodians were made to guard the Emperor, and that purpose was woven into the very core of their being, shaped into them through the Emperor's craft. They could not be turned, could not be corrupted, could not be swayed from their duty. Where the Space Marine legions, for all their might, would one day prove capable of betrayal, the Custodes were made loyal in a way that went deeper than choice. Their devotion to the Emperor built into the substance of what they were. Valdor was the first and purest expression of this, the loyal guardian whose faithfulness never wavered across all the long years of his service. Valdor's loyalty was of a particular kind, and it is worth understanding because it shaped the Custodes who followed. It was a clear-eyed loyalty. The custodians were not blind fanatics, not zealots who served without understanding. They knew the Emperor for what he was, knew him more closely than any other beings alive, stood near enough to see both his greatness and his flaws, and they served him anyway, with a devotion that was a choice made in full knowledge rather than a faith held in ignorance. Valdor served the Emperor the way the closest of guardians serves the master he knows and has chosen to protect, never as a worshipper serves a god. For the Emperor in those days forbade the worship of himself. The loyalty of the Custodes was the loyalty of those who see clearly and remain faithful regardless. The end of Valdor's story is itself a mystery that hangs over the Custodes. After the Horus heresy, after the defense of Terra, and the entombment of the Emperor, Constantin Valdor vanished from the histories. The law does not record his death, only his disappearance, the first Captain General passing from the record into silence. The post of Captain General has been inherited ever since. passed down through the long ages from one custodian to the next, but its first holder, the greatest of the 10,000, faded from the histories without explanation, his fate unrecorded. The first son of the Emperor, the foremost guardian, vanished into the same shadows from which the Emperor had once worked, leaving the Custodes to keep their vigil without the one who had first led them. Why the Emperor made them. There is a question worth sitting with as we close this first part. Why did the Emperor make the Custodes at all, when he would later have the Space Marines and the Primarchs? The answer lies in the difference between an army and a guardian. The Space Marines were made to conquer, vast legions to wage the Great Crusade, and bring the galaxy under the Emperor's rule. They were weapons of expansion, instruments of conquest, made in their thousands to win an empire. But the Custodes were made for something else, to guard the Emperor himself, to be the innermost protection of the master of mankind, the warriors whose sole purpose was his safety. An army conquers, a guardian protects, and the Emperor wanted close to himself a guard rather than an army, beings shaped for the single purpose of keeping him safe. And the Custodes were made for a closeness that the Space Marines could never have. The Astartes were the sons of the Primarchs, grown from their gene seed, bound to their gene fathers. But the Custodes were the direct creations of the Emperor himself, shaped by his own hand, made without the intermediary of a Primarch. They were his in a way the Space Marines were not, his own work, his own sons, crafted one by the master of mankind for the purpose of standing at his side. This direct making, this unmediated bond between the Emperor and his golden warriors, is part of what makes the Custodes unique. They are the Emperor's own, made by him, for him, to guard him alone. There is something in this that foreshadows the long tragedy to come. The Emperor made the Custodes to guard him, shaped them for a closeness and a purpose centered wholly on his living person. He made them to stand at his side, to protect the master of mankind in the fullness of his power and his vision. He could not have known, in those early days of making, what their duty would become, to keep eternal watch, in the end, over a broken body on a golden throne, rather than to guard a living master striding across the galaxy, guardians of a god who could no longer speak to them. The first sons were made to protect the Emperor. They would spend 10,000 years guarding his corpse that would not die. That is the shape of the whole story we will follow across these parts. The making of perfect guardians for a master who would, within a few short centuries, be struck down and entombed, their purpose transformed from the protection of a living god into the endless keeping of a vigil over his ruined form. The golden warriors of the beginning, crafted in hope and ambition at the dawn of the Imperium, would become the silent watchers of a tomb, faithful to a duty that had outlived the master who gave it. But all that lies ahead, tonight at the beginning, they are the Emperor's first and finest creations, the golden ones made by his own hand, the 10,000 at the dawn of their long and faithful watch. Sleep well. Tomorrow we look closer at the golden warriors themselves, the nature of the 10,000, and what makes a custodian more than any other warrior in the Imperium. We have seen how the Custodes were made, the first sons of the Emperor, crafted one by his own hand. Tonight we look at what they became, the golden warriors themselves, the nature of the 10,000. We will sit with their armor and their weapons, with the strange truth that they are warriors and scholars both, with the deadly games they play in secret to keep themselves sharp, and with the silence in which they fight. For the Custodes are unlike any other warriors in the Imperium, and the closer we look, the stranger and more singular they become. Tonight, we sit with the Golden Ones themselves, the brotherhood of demigods, and what sets them apart from all the warriors of mankind. The auramite and the gold. The first thing anyone sees of a custodian is the gold, and the gold is not mere decoration. The custodes are clad in auramite, a precious golden alloy more durable even than the ceramite of Space Marine armor, each suit a masterwork unto itself. Every set of custodian plate is crafted individually, ornately decorated, matched to the warrior who wears it, a unique work of art and war combined. The gold is functional, a metal of extraordinary strength, and it is also a statement. The custodes shine because they are the Emperor's own, the golden warriors whose very colour proclaims their closeness to the master of mankind. Where the Space Marines wear the colours of their chapters, the custodes wear the gold of the Emperor himself, the radiance of the throne they guard. Their weapons match their armour in craft and antiquity. The custodian guard carry the guardian spear, a weapon that is both a blade and a gun, a bladed polearm with a built-in bolt weapon, letting them strike at range and in close combat with the same instrument. They carry the misericordia, a traditional dagger borne by all custodians, a blade of mercy and of execution. They bear vexilla, the great banners that proclaim their heritage and the Emperor's authority, and their armour and weapons are often ancient beyond reckoning, relics of the dark age of technology and the earliest days of the Imperium, carried by warriors who are themselves old enough to have held them for thousands of years. There is a meaning in all this gold and craft that goes beyond war. The custodes are, among their other duties, a living statement of the Imperium's might and splendour. The sight of them in full regalia, golden and perfect and terrible, reinforces the glory of the Imperium in the eyes of its people. A powerful image of the Emperor's majesty made manifest in his golden guardians. They are weapons, yes, the deadliest warriors mankind has made, but they are also symbols, the gleaming proof that the master of mankind is protected by beings of unmatched perfection, the Golden Ones, whose very existence proclaims the glory of the throne they keep. The gold also carries a quieter meaning, one that deepens across the long ages. Gold is the colour of the Emperor, the radiance of the Astronomicon, the light of the throne. To wear it is to belong to him utterly, to be marked as his and his alone. And as the Emperor passed from a living master into the broken thing upon the golden throne, the gold of the custodes became something more like mourning dress, the colour of a glory that had faded, worn by guardians who kept the radiance of a god who could no longer shine for himself. In the early days, the gold was the bright proclamation of a living Emperor's majesty. In the long aftermath, it became the gleam of a vigil kept in the dark, the golden warriors shining on while the god they guarded sat silent and ruined at the heart of their light. The warriors who are also scholars. The strangest truth about the custodes, and the one that most sets them apart, is that they are not only warriors. The custodes spent the long ages of their vigil cultivating their minds with the same care as their bodies. They became theologians, historians, philosophers, warriors and scholars both. Beings who spent 10,000 years studying as much as standing guard. The purpose of this study was deep. They sought to decipher the Emperor's plan for mankind, to understand the vision of their maker, to grasp what he had intended before the heresy shattered everything. The Golden Warriors turned their long vigil into a long study, becoming, over the millennia, an order of warrior scholars, as devoted to understanding as to war. This sets them apart from the Space Marines in a way as deep as their making. The Astartes are warriors, bred and trained for battle, their purpose the waging of war. The Custodes are warriors too, the finest the galaxy has known, but they are more. Thinkers, scholars, keepers of knowledge, and seekers of understanding. A custodian might be a master of the blade and a master of philosophy at once, a warrior who has killed demons and read widely in the histories of mankind, a guardian whose mind is as sharp as his spear. The long vigil gave them time, and they used that time to become wise as well as deadly, the only warriors of the Imperium who are also among its greatest scholars. There is a change in them across the millennia that the lore notes, and it is poignant. The earliest custodes, the ones made by the Emperor in the rationalist dawn of the Imperium, were hard-headed and clear-eyed, beings of reason in an age that sought to banish superstition. But 10,000 years of guarding a god on a golden throne, 10,000 years of warp-touched horror and miracle, wore down that early rationalism. The later Custodes became more mystical, more prone to faith and wonder, the long ages of impossible things teaching them to believe what their rationalist forebears would have denied. The golden warriors who began as creatures of pure reason became, over the millennia, keepers of a mystery they had come to revere, their minds shaped by the long vigil into something more contemplative and more haunted than their makers intended. The blood games. To keep their edge across the long ages of vigil, the Custodes devised a practice as deadly as it is strange: the blood games. The blood games are the Custodes' method of testing themselves and the defenses they guard. In a blood game, a custodian is sent out into the Imperium with a single task: to penetrate the security of the Imperial Palace, to breach the defenses of Terra, to reach a target at the very heart of the Emperor's domain by any means necessary. The custodian becomes, for the duration of the game, an enemy of the Imperium, testing every layer of its protection from the outside, finding the weaknesses, exposing the gaps, proving where the defenses of the palace might fail. The games are real. The dangers are real. Custodians have died playing them. The purpose is to keep the guardians and their defenses sharp across the long ages when no true enemy comes. For most of their history, the Custodes faced no direct assault on the palace, no great war at the Emperor's door. The danger of such a long peace is complacency, the slow softening of guardians who never face a real threat. The blood games are the answer, a constant, deadly testing of the defenses from within, a way of ensuring that the protection of the Emperor is never allowed to grow weak, that every weakness is found by a custodian before it can be found by an enemy. The Golden Warriors war against their own defenses, so that those defenses will never fail when a true enemy comes. There is a discipline in this that speaks to the whole nature of the Custodes. They do not wait passively at their posts. They test, probe, challenge, turning their own vigilance into a weapon against complacency, playing out the role of the infiltrator and the assassin, so that no real infiltrator or assassin will ever succeed. A custodian who runs a successful blood game, who breaches the palace's defenses and reaches his target, has done the Imperium a service, exposing a flaw that can then be mended. The games are the expression of a guardianship that refuses to rest, a vigilance that hunts its own weaknesses, the Golden Warriors keeping themselves and their charge safe through the endless rehearsal of the very threats they exist to stop. The silence in which they fight. There is a quality to the Custodes in battle that captures something essential about them, and it is a kind of silence. The Custodes have no battle cry. Where other warriors of the Imperium charge into battle roaring the Emperor's name, chanting litanies, crying out their fury and their faith, the Custodes fight in silence, with grim determination, saying nothing. They do not need to rouse themselves with shouts or steel themselves with chants. They fight with a focused and wordless intensity, the golden warriors moving through battle in a terrible quiet that is more frightening than any war cry. The silence is the sound of beings who have no doubt to shout down, no fear to drown out, only the pure and certain purpose for which they were made. This silence connects to the deepest part of what the Custodes are. The Space Marines cry out the Emperor's name because they worship him, because they need the faith and the fury to carry them into battle. The Custodes do not worship the Emperor in that way. They know him, guarded him, stood close enough to see him as he was. Their loyalty needs no war cry because it is a loyalty of knowledge rather than of faith. The steady certainty of beings who serve the master they understand. They fight in silence because their devotion is too deep and too sure to need expression. A wordless faithfulness that speaks louder, in its quiet, than any shout. And there is the matter of the bell. When a custodian falls in battle, a rare and terrible event, the loss is marked on Terra by the tolling of a great bell, the bell of lost souls, and by the vengeance of his comrades on the field. The death of one of the 10,000 is a thing of such weight that it is commemorated across the whole Imperium, a single golden warrior's fall, ringing out from Terra itself. This is the measure of how precious each custodian is, how rare their deaths, how heavily each loss falls. The silent warriors who fight without a war cry are mourned when they fall by the loudest bell of all. The shape of the order. For all their individual perfection, the Custodes are an order, and the way that order is structured says much about them. At the head of the 10,000 stands the Captain General, the supreme commander of the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's chief protector and champion. The post has been passed down since the disappearance of the first Captain General, Constantin Valdor, inherited across the long ages by the most distinguished of the custodians. The Captain General holds absolute authority over the order, and the rank carries weight beyond the custodes themselves, for the Captain General may take a seat among the High Lords of Terra, the council that rules the Imperium in the Emperor's name. Few have chosen to take that seat, the politics of the Imperium being a messy business, but those who have wielded great influence over the fate of mankind. Beneath the Captain General, the structure of the Custodes is looser and stranger than the rigid hierarchies of the rest of the Imperium. The Custodes are organized into shield hosts, the great formations of the Order, but within them the ranks are often informal, marks of respect for proven skill and experience rather than a strict chain of command. The Golden Warriors decide much by consensus, by the mutual respect of peers, each one wise and capable enough to be trusted with judgment. They are less an army of followers led by a few commanders than a brotherhood of near equals, each a master, governing themselves through respect and shared purpose, more than through orders handed down. This reflects the nature of beings each crafted to perfection. A custodian does not need to be commanded the way an ordinary soldier does not need the rigid discipline that holds a mass army together. Each is wise, capable, and certain of his purpose, able to act on his own judgment, trusted to do what the situation requires. The looseness of their structure is the looseness possible among beings who are all individually masters. The 10,000 govern themselves as a council of the perfect, each one trusted, each one capable, bound together by the shared purpose for which they were all made, rather than by the chains of command that hold lesser forces in line. One mark of their status stands above all others. The Custodes hold the magisterium lex ultima, an authority that makes them answerable to one being alone, the Emperor. They stand above all other law and command in the Imperium, bound by nothing save the direct will of the Master of Mankind. No High Lord, no Inquisitor, no commander of any other imperial force may command a custodian. They answer to the Emperor and to no one else, the golden warriors standing outside and above the whole vast machinery of imperial authority, bound only to the one they were made to guard. The Brotherhood of Demigods. Before we close, it is worth gathering what all this makes the Custodes, taken together. They are called the Brotherhood of Demigods, and the name is earned. Each custodian is a being of such physical and mental perfection, crafted with such care, honed across such long ages, that they stand above even the Space Marines, near to the Primarchs themselves in their individual might. The deadliest of them, in the latter days, are spoken of as approaching the power of the Primarchs of old, the demigod sons of the Emperor. To stand among the Custodes is to stand among the closest things to demigods that mankind has made, beings of a perfection that the ordinary measures of humanity cannot contain. And yet, for all this might, they are defined by a single purpose, and it is a purpose of service rather than conquest. The Brotherhood of Demigods does not rule. It does not conquer. It guards. All their perfection, all their might, all their long study and their deadly games and their silent battle serves the one end for which they were made, the protection of the Emperor and the throne he sits upon. The demigods of the Imperium are its guardians, rather than its masters, the most powerful beings mankind has made, bending all their power to the single duty of keeping safe the one they were made to protect. This is the shape of the 10,000, the Golden Legion at the height of its purpose. Perfect warriors and deep scholars, testing themselves in deadly games, fighting in terrible silence, each one a near demigod and each one irreplaceable, all of them bound to the single duty of guarding the Emperor. It is a magnificent thing, the brotherhood of golden demigods made to protect the master of mankind. And it was made for a living Emperor, a master who could lead them, command them, share with them the vision they studied so hard to understand. What became of that purpose when the Emperor was struck down, when the living master became a broken body on a golden throne, is the turn that the coming parts must follow. Tomorrow we go to the Great Crusade, the golden age of the Custodes, when the Emperor still walked among them and the galaxy still seemed theirs to win. Sleep well. Tomorrow we walk beside the Emperor in the light of the Great Crusade, in the days before the betrayal, when the golden warriors guarded a living god. There was a time before the long vigil when the Custodes walked beside a living god across a galaxy being won. This was the Great Crusade, the golden age of the Imperium and of the Custodes both, when the Emperor strode among the stars reclaiming the lost worlds of mankind, and his golden guardians stood at his side. It was the high noon of their purpose, the age for which they had been made, and it ended in the worst betrayal in the history of the species, the Horus Heresy, when half the Emperor's sons turned against him and the galaxy burned. Tonight we walk with the Custodes through their golden age and into the darkness that ended it. Tonight we sit with the Talons of the Emperor, in the light of the Great Crusade and the shadow of the betrayal. The companions of the Emperor. During the Great Crusade, the Custodes were closer to the Emperor than any other beings, and their role was the role of companions. As the Emperor led the Great Crusade to reclaim the galaxy, the Custodes were his personal guard, his companions, his advisors, rarely leaving his side as he strode across the stars, uniting humanity. They were more than bodyguards. They stood with him, counseled him, embodied his will, the innermost circle of the master of mankind. A core detachment always remained at the Emperor's side, guarding his person through the greatest conflicts of the age. And individual custodians travelled the galaxy as his envoys and agents, carrying the Emperor's will to distant worlds, acting in his name where he could not be in person. The Emperor valued them above almost anything, and the way he used them shows it. He spent the Space Marines without hesitation. Vast legions thrown into the wars of the Crusade, hundreds of thousands of superhuman warriors expended to win the galaxy. But the Custodes he was ever reluctant to risk. Each one was too precious, too long in the making, too dear to spend in the ordinary battles of conquest. He held them close, used them sparingly, guarded their lives with the same care they guarded his. The Golden Warriors were the one thing in his vast war machine that the Emperor would not throw away. The beloved guardians he kept near and risked rarely. This was the golden age of the Custodes, and it is worth holding the image of it before the darkness comes. The Emperor alive and striding across the galaxy, his vision unfolding, the lost worlds of mankind returning to the fold, and at his side the Golden Warriors, his companions and guardians, made for this very purpose and fulfilling it in full. They guarded a living God in the fullness of his power, walked beside him through his greatest age, stood closest to the master of mankind as he remade the galaxy. It was everything they had been made for, and it would not last. There is a thread worth drawing here, between the Custodes and the Space Marines, who fought the Crusade in their hundreds of thousands. The two were made by the same hand, for the same master, and yet they were profoundly different. The Space Marines were the vanguard of expansion, the warriors who conquered the galaxy world by world, the public face of the Emperor's might. The Custodes were the innermost guard, the warriors who never strayed far from the Emperor himself, the hidden heart of his protection. The Custodes held the Astartes in genuine regard, honouring their conquests and their sacrifices. But they were mindful too, of a difference that the heresy would prove in blood. The Space Marines could fall. Made in their masses from a shared gene seed, bound to Primarchs, who might themselves be turned, the Astartes carried the possibility of corruption that the individually crafted, incorruptible Custodes did not. The Golden Warriors respected their cousins and watched them, knowing that what could be mass-produced could also, in its masses, be turned. That knowledge would be vindicated in the most terrible way. When the heresy came, it was the Space Marines who turned, half the legions following Horus into rebellion. The mass-produced warriors proving the fallibility the Custodes had always known was possible. The Golden Warriors, incorruptible by their making, held faithful to the last. The difference between the two creations of the Emperor, the mass-produced legion and the individually crafted guard, was written in the heresy in letters of fire. The Astartes could betray, and many did, while the Custodes, made loyal in the substance of their being, could not and did not. The Talons of the Emperor. The Custodes did not stand alone at the Emperor's side. They had a counterpart, a sister order with whom they formed a single instrument, and together they were called the Talons of the Emperor. The Sisters of Silence were the other half of the Talons, where the Custodes were the right hand of the Emperor. The Sisters of Silence were the left, the two orders together forming the Talons of the Emperor, the personal instruments of the master of mankind. The Sisters were warriors as dedicated and loyal as the Custodes. and they had a particular and rare gift. They were blanks, bearers of the pariah gene, beings who had no presence in the warp at all. They were untouchable by psychic power, anathema to sorcery and to the demonic, their very presence smothering the powers of the warp around them. This gift made the Sisters of Silence the perfect counterpart to the Golden Warriors. The Custodes were the supreme guardians of the Emperor's body, the warriors who could face any physical threat. The Sisters of Silence were the guardians against the threats of the warp, the anti-psychers whose presence denied sorcery and burned away the demonic. Together, the two orders covered every kind of danger to the Emperor, the Custodes against the physical, and the Sisters against the psychic, the right hand and the left, the talons of the Emperor closing around any threat to the master of mankind. There is a meaning in this pairing that reaches to the heart of the Emperor's purpose. The Emperor in those days was working to reduce the influence of the warp, to build a humanity that could reach the stars without the perils of the immaterium, to deny chaos its foothold in the world. The talons of the Emperor embodied this purpose. The Sisters of Silence denied the warp any purchase, their very existence a wall against the immaterium. The Custodes, made in the same rationalist dawn, shared the attitude, a turning away from the warp, a guardianship of the material world against the horrors beyond it. The talons were the Emperor's answer to the warp, the right hand and the left closing against the darkness he sought to hold back. The fate of the two halves of the talons would differ greatly, and it is worth marking here. The Custodes endured, kept their numbers and their purpose across the 10,000 years to come, remained the guardians of the throne into the dark age of the 41st millennium. The Sisters of Silence did not fare so well. The Horus heresy and its aftermath shattered them. Many slain, many more left purposeless once the Emperor was entombed and could no longer be guarded against the psychic threats they existed to stop. The order of the Silent Sisters fragmented, scattered across the Imperium, lost amid its immensity, fading from the central role they had held as the Emperor's left hand. The talons of the Emperor were broken in half by the heresy, the right hand enduring at the throne and the left hand scattering into the dark, the pairing that had closed against the warp sundered by the same catastrophe that struck down the Emperor. It would take 10,000 years and the return of a Primarch for the Sisters of Silence to be gathered again and the talons of the Emperor to be made whole. But that is a story for the final parts. In the golden age of the Great Crusade, the talons were complete, the right hand and the left, the Golden Guardians and the Silent Sisters, the two orders the Emperor had made to stand closest to him against every threat the galaxy and the warp could offer. Together, they were the perfect instrument of the master of mankind, and together they served him through the brightest age the Imperium would ever know. The envoys and the enforcers. The Custodes of the Great Crusade were not only guardians at the Emperor's side, they were also his agents, sent out to do his will across the galaxy. Individual custodians, or small detachments, were dispatched on the most important missions, the tasks the Emperor trusted to no one else. They acted as envoys, carrying his word to distant worlds, and as enforcers, executing his will where it had to be done by hands he trusted absolutely. A single custodian arriving on a world carried the authority of the Emperor himself. The Golden Warrior, an extension of the Master of Mankind. His presence, the Emperor's presence. The Space Marines conquered the galaxy in their legions. The Custodes moved through it as the Emperor's own hand, doing the work that required absolute trust rather than numbers. The greatest of these missions came at Prospero, the homeworld of the Thousand Sons. When Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the Thousand Sons, broke the Emperor's command against sorcery, the Emperor sent a force to bring him to account, and the Custodes were part of it. Constantin Valdor, the first Captain General, led a contingent of custodians alongside Leman Russ and his Space Wolves to Prospero. There, Valdor faced the elite blade masters of Magnus, warriors who could see attacks before they came through their psychic foresight. He slew over 30 of them and took only a single wound, the Captain General cutting through the finest warriors of the Thousand Sons, a demigod of auramite and blood. The mission to Prospero was meant to be a capture, an apprehension of the rogue Primarch. But Horus, already turning toward treachery, twisted the order, and the capture became an annihilation, the burning of Prospero and the breaking of the Thousand Sons. It was one of the early tragedies that led toward the great betrayal, and the Custodes were there in the midst of it, doing the Emperor's will even as that will was being corrupted by the treachery of his favored son. The Golden Warriors served faithfully, as they always did, even as the galaxy began its slide toward the heresy that would end their golden age. The war beneath the palace. There is a part of the Custodes' role in the heresy that few outside their order know, and it is among their greatest and most terrible labors. The war beneath the imperial palace. The Emperor had been building a great work beneath Terra, a project to open a human path through the webway, the ancient network of tunnels outside reality that the Eldari had once used to cross the galaxy without touching the warp. It was to be the Emperor's masterstroke, a way for humanity to travel the stars without the perils of the immaterium, a final defeat of the warp's hold on the species. But the project was broken. Through catastrophe and treachery, the webway gate beneath the palace was breached, and the horrors of the warp came pouring through, demons spilling into the tunnels beneath Terra in endless numbers. And it was the Custodes, with the Sisters of Silence, who held the breach. For years, in the dark tunnels beneath the imperial palace, the Talons of the Emperor fought an endless war against the demonic hordes pouring from the broken webway gate. They held back the tide, the Golden Warriors and the Silent Sisters standing against the horrors of the warp in a battle that never ended, that could never be won, that could only be held. It was a war without glory, fought in the dark beneath the world against an enemy that came without end, and the Custodes held it year after year while the heresy raged above and the galaxy burned. The cost was terrible. The war within the webway consumed Custodes and Sisters of Silence alike, the Talons of the Emperor suffering grievous losses in the endless battle beneath the palace. Tribunes fell. Whole formations were lost. The order that could never quickly replace its losses was bled in the dark, holding a breach that should never have opened, paying in irreplaceable lives for a catastrophe that was not their doing. The Golden Warriors who had walked beside the Emperor in his golden age found themselves dying in the dark beneath his palace, holding back the warp itself so that the Emperor could continue his greater work above. It was guardianship at its most desperate and most thankless, the Custodes giving their irreplaceable lives in a war no one would sing of. The betrayal. For all the Custodes could do, for all their vigilance and their incorruptible loyalty, they could not stop what was coming. Chaos gained its foothold in the legions despite the Custodes, despite their incorruptible influence, despite all their vigilance. They could not be everywhere. Many things were hidden from them. And in the places they could not watch, the War Master Horus, the Emperor's most beloved son, was turning to the dark gods, drawing half the Primarchs and their legions into rebellion against the throne. The catastrophe of the Horus heresy became inevitable, the great betrayal that would consume the Imperium in civil war, and the Custodes, for all their perfection, could not prevent it. The threat had come from within, rather than from outside where their guard was set, from the very sons of the Emperor. There is a bitterness in this for the Custodes that the law touches on. They were made to guard the Emperor, incorruptible, vigilant, perfect. And the blow that nearly destroyed him came from a direction they could not guard, from his own sons, through a treachery woven in places hidden from their watch. The Golden Warriors could face any enemy that came at the Emperor with a blade. They could not face the slow corruption of the legions, the turning of brother against brother, the betrayal that grew in the heart of the Imperium itself. Their guardianship, for all its perfection, had a limit, and that limit was the treachery of those the Emperor trusted, the sons who turned against their father. As the heresy raged and the traitor forces drove toward Terra, the Custodes prepared for the thing they had been made to prevent, an assault on the Emperor himself. The traitor legions and their demonic allies came for Terra, for the Imperial Palace, for the master of mankind at the heart of it all. And the Custodes gathered to make their stand, the Golden Warriors who had guarded the Emperor through his golden age, now facing the final defense, the siege that would decide the fate of the species. Everything they were, everything they had been made for, came down to the defense of Terra and the Emperor at its heart. Sleep well. Tomorrow we come to the Siege of Terra, the worst hour of the Custodes, when they fought to save the Emperor and could not. This is the hour the Custodes were made for, and the hour in which they failed. The Siege of Terra was the climax of the Horus heresy, the final assault on the Emperor and his palace, the moment when everything the Golden Warriors existed to prevent came at last to their door. They fought as no warriors had ever fought, holding the walls of the palace against the traitor legions and the demons of the warp. And in the end, they could not save the Emperor. The master of mankind was struck down, his body broken, and the Custodes bore him to the Golden Throne and began the vigil that would last 10,000 years. Tonight we sit with the worst hour of the Golden Warriors. Tonight we sit with the Siege of Terra, the defense that failed, and the beginning of the long watch. The last war. When the traitor forces came for Terra, the Custodes stood as the innermost ring of its defense, the last wall around the Emperor. The traitor legions and their demonic allies descended upon Terra, the greatest army of darkness the galaxy had ever seen, driving toward the Imperial Palace and the Emperor at its heart. The defense was led by Rogel Dawn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fis, the master of fortification, but at the innermost heart of it stood the Custodes, the Golden Warriors who were the Emperor's own guard. They fought alongside the loyalist Space Marines and the countless soldiers of the Imperial Army, but they were something apart, the last and finest defenders, the wall that stood closest to the Emperor himself. The fighting was beyond anything in the history of the species. Megatons of explosive death rained from burning skies. Demonic abominations spilled through the torn veil of reality. Chaos Titans hammered the walls of the palace, and through all of it, the Custodes did not waver. They showed no mercy to the traitor Astartes, the fallen sons who had betrayed the Emperor, cutting them down without hesitation. They held their ground amid horror that would have broken any other defenders, the Golden Warriors standing firm as the world burned around them, faithful to the duty for which they had been made. Constantin Valdor was at the heart of the defense, as he had been at the heart of everything. He fought at the Colossi Gate alongside Jagatai Khan, the Primarch of the White Scars, holding the line against the demonic hordes. Loyalist Space Marines who saw the Captain General in battle spoke of him cutting through traitor Astartes as easily as a Space Marine cuts through ordinary men, a demigod of Auramite reaping the fallen. The first of the 10,000 fought at the Eternity Gate itself, the threshold of the Emperor's inner sanctum, holding back the tide so that the Emperor might do what had to be done. The Custodes fought at the Eternity Gate beside the greatest heroes of the Loyalist cause. Valdor stood there with Rogel Dawn, the master of the defense, and with Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch of the Blood Angels, the three of them holding the final threshold against the horrors that came. It was the innermost line, the last barrier before the Emperor's sanctum, and the Golden Warriors held it alongside the Primarchs in the worst hours of the siege. Around them the palace burned, the walls fell, the demons poured through every breach, and still the Custodes held the Eternity Gate, the last wall around the master of mankind, giving everything to buy the time the Emperor needed. There is a grandeur in this defense that the long sorrow afterwards should not erase. The Custodes fought at the Siege of Terra as no Guardians had ever fought, holding the innermost walls against the full fury of chaos, standing beside Primarchs and angels in the defense of mankind's God. They cut down traitors and demons beyond counting. They held when holding seemed impossible. Whatever came after, whatever failure the duel would bring, the Custodes at the Siege of Terra were everything they had been made to be. The perfect guardians, giving all they had in the defense of the Emperor, the golden wall that would not break even as the world ended around it. The final confrontation. The siege reached its climax in a single act that would define the next 10,000 years. The Emperor's confrontation with Horus. As the siege ground on, the War Master Horus lowered the void shields of his battle barge, the vengeful spirit, an act of arrogance, a challenge, an invitation. And the Emperor took it. He gathered a force for a final boarding action, a last desperate strike at the heart of the rebellion, to face his fallen son in person and end the heresy with his own hand. The Custodes were part of that force, the Golden Warriors accompanying the Emperor on his last battle, Valdor among them, fighting through the corridors of the traitor flagship toward the confrontation that would decide everything. The boarding action was a slaughter. The Emperor and his guard fought through the horrors of the vengeful spirit, and the Custodes fought beside him, cutting through the traitor forces, Valdor wounding the traitor champion, Ezekiel Abaddon, in the fighting. But the Emperor went on toward Horus alone, or nearly so, for the final confrontation was between father and son, the master of mankind and the favored child who had betrayed him. The Custodes, for all their might, for all their devotion, could not fight that battle for him. It was the Emperor's to fight, and theirs only to watch and to hold the way. The Emperor defeated Horus. In the end, the master of mankind broke through whatever restraint had stayed his hand, and unleashed his full power, and destroyed the War Master utterly, soul and body, ending the rebellion's heart. But the cost was beyond bearing. In the duel, Horus mortally wounded the Emperor, broke his body past any healing, left the master of mankind a ruined husk, with his mind and soul clinging to a shattered form. The Custodes had stood at the threshold, had cut down traitors beyond count, had done everything their making allowed, and they could not prevent it. Horus struck the Emperor down, and the Golden Warriors, for all their perfection, could only bear witness to the wounding of the god they were made to guard. This is the deepest wound in the soul of the Custodes, and it shaped them ever after. They were made to guard the Emperor, to keep him safe, to stand between him and any harm. And at the one moment that mattered above all others, they could not. The final battle was the Emperor's alone, the confrontation between father and son that no guardian could fight in his stead. The Custodes, the most perfect warriors mankind had ever made, the golden demigods crafted to protect the master of mankind, stood helpless at the threshold while their god was broken. All their might meant nothing in that hour. All their perfection could not reach the place where the wound was struck. They had been made for a single purpose, and in the supreme test of that purpose, they failed through no fault of their making, because the battle was one they could not be part of. The law is unflinching about this, and it is part of why the Custodes are so haunting. They are perfect, and their perfection was not enough. The deadliest warriors in the galaxy, the incorruptible guardians, the golden demigods, could not save the one being they existed to save. The Emperor was struck down despite them, beyond them, in a battle that left them watching from the threshold. And they would carry that failure for 10,000 years, the knowledge that they were made to guard the Emperor, and that, when it mattered most, they had not. Every day of the long vigil that followed was lived in the shadow of that hour, the golden warriors keeping their endless watch over the consequence of the one failure their perfection could not prevent. The bearing of the broken god. What the Custodes did next is the act that turned them from the Emperor's guard into the Emperor's mourners. Grief-stricken, the Custodes bore their master back to Terra. The Emperor's body was broken beyond any healing, his life ebbing, his vast power and vaster mind clinging to a form that could no longer hold them. There was only one thing that could preserve him: the Golden Throne, the great arcane machine beneath the palace, the device that had powered his work on the webway. The Emperor was interred within the machineries of the Golden Throne, his broken body placed upon it, the throne sustaining the flicker of life that remained, holding him forever at the threshold between life and death. He would not die, and he would never again be whole. This was the end of everything the Custodes had been made for, and the beginning of what they would become. They had been crafted to guard a living God, to stand beside the master of mankind in the fullness of his power. Now that God was a broken body on a machine, unable to speak, unable to lead, unable to be the master they had served. The Golden Warriors had failed in the one task that mattered most. They had not kept the Emperor safe, and now they faced an eternity of guarding what remained of him, a vigil over a ruined form that could neither die nor live, the guardians of a god who had passed beyond their protection into a living death. And so they swore an oath. Grief-stricken, the Custodes swore a penitent's oath and donned the mourning black, consigning themselves to watching over their fallen lord for the rest of time. The Golden Warriors who had walked beside a living emperor took on the black of mourning, swore to keep the eternal vigil, bound themselves to the broken god on the throne for all the ages to come. The penitent's oath is the key to understanding them ever after. They guard the Emperor out of penance as much as duty, out of the grief and the guilt of having failed to save him. The long watch is their atonement, the eternal vigil their penance for the one failure that mattered, the keeping of the broken god their endless apology for not having kept him whole. The god who could not die. It is worth sitting with what the Custodes were left to guard, because it shaped everything they would become across the long ages. The Emperor on the Golden Throne was neither living nor dead. The throne sustained him, held the spark of his life and his vast power in a body too broken to hold them on its own, kept him at the threshold between life and death, where he would remain forever. He could not heal. He could not rise. He could not speak or lead, or be the master of mankind he had been. And he could not die, the throne holding him past the death that should have claimed him, keeping his ruined form at the edge of an ending that never came. The god the Custodes had guarded in the fullness of his power was now a silent, broken thing upon a machine, present and absent at once, alive and dead at once, a presence they could feel, and a master they could no longer serve in any way he could acknowledge. To guard such a being is a strange and terrible duty. The Custodes kept watch over a god who could not tell them he knew they were there. They protected a master who could give them no command, no word, no sign. Whether the emperor, on his throne, was aware of his guardians, whether his vast, trapped mind knew of their vigil, whether he suffered or dreamed or merely endured, the Custodes could not know. They kept their watch in the dark of that uncertainty, guarding a god whose awareness of them was a mystery, serving a master whose silence might be unconsciousness or might be an agony beyond expression. The long vigil was a watch kept over a question. The golden warriors guarding a presence they could not be sure perceived them, and yet the duty was real, and they kept it. The Custodes did not abandon the emperor because he could no longer command them. They did not slacken their watch because he could no longer see it. They guarded the broken god with the same absolute devotion they had given the living one, perhaps with more, the failure of the siege sharpening their faithfulness into penance. The silence of the emperor did not lessen their service. If anything, it deepened it, the golden warriors keeping faith with a master who could no longer keep faith with them, holding their vigil over a god who might never know it was held. There is a further mystery in the aftermath that touches the Custodes' own continuation. New Custodes could still be made, even after the Emperor's internment. The most accomplished bio-alchemists of Terra trusted with the secret arts that the Emperor had first commanded. The Order could replace its losses, slowly, across the millennia, keeping its numbers near the legendary 10,000. But the Emperor, who had first crafted them by his own hand, could no longer make them. The new Custodes were shaped by mortal hands, following the Emperor's ancient methods, made for a master who could no longer make them himself. The golden warriors went on, generation after generation, crafted in the image of beings the living Emperor had made, guarding the broken god who could no longer father them as he once had. The first of the 10,000 departs. There is one more thing the lore records of the aftermath, and it concerns the greatest of them all. After the siege, after the Emperor was placed upon the throne, Constantin Valdor remained for a time, overseeing the reorganization of the Custodes, helping to set the Order on the path it would walk through the long ages. When Guilliman, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, came to Terra distraught at what had befallen the Imperium and the Emperor, Valdor expressed confidence that the Master of Mankind had foreseen all that had happened and planned accordingly. Yet, the lore tells us, secretly, Valdor was not sure this was true. The first of the 10,000, who had served the Emperor since the Unification Wars, carried a doubt he showed to no one, that perhaps the Emperor had not foreseen this, that perhaps the catastrophe was nothing more than catastrophe, that perhaps there was no plan beneath the ruin. And then Valdor vanished. Sometime after the heresy, around the time that Guilliman II disappeared, Constantin Valdor slipped out of the Imperial Palace in the dead of night. He turned back once to look upon the palace, and whispered 3 words, "Only in death," the beginning of the old imperial saying, "Only in death does duty end." And then he was gone, vanished without a trace, his fate unknown even to the Custodes themselves. His weapons and his armour never came to the Hall of Armaments, where the relics of fallen custodians are kept. The first and greatest of the Golden Warriors passed out of the histories into silence, leaving the order he had founded to keep its vigil without him. There is a deep sadness in Valdor's departure, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. The first of the 10,000, who had stood at the Emperor's side from the very beginning, who had fought through the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade and the Siege of Terra, who had borne his broken master to the throne, could not stay to keep the vigil, whether from grief, from doubt, from some secret mission, or from a sorrow too deep to bear. Valdor left. "Only in death does duty end," he whispered, and then he walked away from the duty he had kept his whole existence, vanishing into the dark. The greatest of the Custodes did not remain to guard the broken god. He looked upon the palace one last time, spoke of death and duty, and disappeared, leaving his brothers to the eternal watch he could not keep. Sleep well. Tomorrow we enter the long vigil itself, the 10,000 years in which the Golden Warriors kept their watch over the broken god, and the silence in which they served. For 10,000 years, the Custodes kept their watch. From the entombment of the Emperor to the dawn of the 41st millennium, across a span of time almost beyond imagining, the Golden Warriors stood guard over the broken god on the throne, and the galaxy outside their walls forgot they existed. This is the long vigil, the heart of what the Custodes are. 10,000 years of silence and duty, of guarding a god who could not speak, of withdrawing from the galaxy into the keeping of a single sacred charge. Tonight we sit with the long watch itself, the ages of stillness, and what they made of the Golden Warriors. Tonight we sit with the 10,000 years, the longest vigil ever kept, and the silence at the heart of it. The Edict of Restraint. The shape of the long vigil was set by a single decree, made in the aftermath of the heresy, that would bind the Custodes to Terra for 10,000 years. After the Emperor was entombed, the Imperium had to be rebuilt, and Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, took up the work of reordering a shattered realm. Among the many reforms he made, in cooperation with Constantin Valdor before the Captain General vanished, was the Edict of Restraint. The edict confined the Custodes to Terra, forbidding them from leaving the world in force, limiting them to the defense of the Imperial Palace and the Emperor within it. The Golden Warriors, who had ranged across the galaxy as the Emperor's envoys and enforcers, were drawn in, bound to the throne world, set to the single duty of guarding the Emperor's tomb. There was reason in the edict, hard reason born of the heresy. The Custodes were the Emperor's last and finest guard, and the heresy had shown how close the Imperium could come to losing him. To risk the Golden Warriors in the wars of the galaxy, to spend them on distant battlefields, was to risk leaving the Emperor unguarded. Better to hold them at Terra, to keep them always at the throne, to ensure that whatever befell the galaxy, the Emperor himself would never again stand undefended. The edict made the Custodes into what they would be for 10,000 years, no longer a force that ranged the stars, but a garrison of one world, the keepers of a single sacred place. And so, the Custodes withdrew from the galaxy. For 10,000 years they rarely left the Imperial Palace, and even more rarely left Terra. The order that had walked beside the Emperor across the stars became a thing of one world, one palace, one throne. the galaxy waged its endless wars without them. The Imperium rose and decayed and endured without their hand, and the Custodes kept their watch, drawn into the heart of Terra, guarding the broken god, while the ages turned outside their walls. They became, across those long years, almost a legend, a thing half forgotten by the wider Imperium, golden warriors that most of humanity never saw, and many believed to be only myth. There is a cost to this withdrawal that the law lets us feel, and it is a cost paid in the wars the Custodes did not fight. Across 10,000 years, the Imperium faced horror after horror. Orc invasions that reached the gates of Terra, the Tyranids consuming whole systems, the Black Crusades pouring out of the Eye of Terror, plagues and heresies and xenos beyond counting. And through nearly all of it, the finest warriors mankind had ever made stood still on Terra, forbidden by the edict to leave, watching a god who could not move while the galaxy burned. How many worlds might the Custodes have saved had they been free to fight? How many horrors might 10,000 golden demigods have turned aside? The edict held them back from all of it, kept them at the throne, spent their incomparable strength on a vigil rather than a war. Whether this was wisdom or waste is a question the Imperium itself would come to debate, and we will return to it. For the long ages, though, the edict held, and the Custodes obeyed it as they obeyed all their duties, wholly, without complaint, with the absolute faithfulness of their making. They did not chafe against the restraint, did not break the edict to seek the glory of distant wars. They kept to Terra, kept to the throne, kept the watch the edict bound them to, the golden warriors holding their posts through 10,000 years of horror they were forbidden to fight, faithful to the restraint as they were faithful to all else, because the Emperor's safety came before all else, even before the saving of the galaxy that was decaying outside their walls. The Keepers of the Threshold. Within the long vigil, the Custodes held a particular and absolute authority. They decided who could come before the Emperor. It is the Custodes who decide who may enter the throne room of the Emperor, and when. This is no small power. The Emperor on the Golden Throne is the god of the Imperium, the holiest being in the human galaxy, and access to his presence is among the most sacred things that exist, and it is controlled wholly by the Custodes. They guard the Eternity Gate, the great door to the Emperor's sanctum, and they decide who passes through it. No one comes before the Emperor without the leave of the Golden Warriors, the Keepers of the Threshold who hold the way to the holiest place in the Imperium. Such is their authority in this that even the mightiest of the Imperium must bow to it. Space Marines, the superhuman warriors of the Adeptus Astartes, must kneel before the Custodes. Inquisitors, the dread agents of the Imperium's secret power, who answer to almost no one, must kneel before the Custodes. The Golden Warriors stand above them all in this one sacred matter, the Keepers of the Emperor's Threshold, the Wardens whose leave is needed to approach the god. In a galaxy of vast and terrible powers, the Custodes hold an authority that humbles even the greatest, the keeping of the way to the Emperor himself. This duty shaped the long vigil into something more than mere defense. The Custodes were more than the Emperor's guard against attack. They were the wardens of his sanctity, the keepers of the holiest space in the Imperium, the ones who decided who was worthy to stand in the presence of the god. For 10,000 years they held this charge, judging who might approach the throne, turning away the unworthy, guarding the sacred access with the same care as the sacred person. The Keepers of the Threshold held a power that was as much priestly as martial, the wardens of the way to the god, the guardians of his presence as well as his body. the service in silence. What was it like those 10,000 years? The lore gives us the texture of it, and it is a thing of stillness and silence. For most of the long vigil, no great enemy came. The heresy was over, and for thousands of years, the Emperor's sanctum faced no direct assault, no great war at the threshold of the throne. The Custodes kept their watch through ages of stillness, standing guard over a god who did not move, in a sanctum that no enemy reached, year after year, century after century, the longest and quietest watch ever kept. The drama of the siege gave way to the endless stillness of the vigil, the golden warriors holding their posts through ages in which, most of the time, nothing happened at all. It was in this stillness that the Custodes became the warriors and scholars we met in earlier parts. The long quiet gave them time, and they filled it with study, with the cultivation of their minds, with the deep contemplation of the Emperor's vision and the histories of mankind. They played their blood games to keep their edge against the complacency that such a long peace might bring. They tended their armor and their relics, kept their traditions, maintained the order across the turning ages. The long vigil was no idleness, but a disciplined stillness, a watchfulness sustained across millennia. The golden warriors holding themselves ready through ages in which readiness was rarely tested. And it was a lonely duty in its way. The Custodes guarded a god who could not speak to them, served a master who could give no command, kept faith with a presence whose awareness of them was a mystery. They withdrew from the galaxy, became half forgotten, served in a silence that no one outside their walls witnessed. The long vigil was a service kept for its own sake, a faithfulness held without reward or recognition. The golden warriors guarding the broken god through ages of silence because that was their duty and their penance, whether or not anyone ever knew. There is a loneliness in that, a grandeur and a sadness together. The most perfect warriors mankind ever made, spending 10,000 years in the silent keeping of a god who could not thank them. There is a question that hangs over the whole of the long vigil, and the Custodes lived inside it. What does it mean to guard a god who may never know he is guarded? The Emperor on the throne gave no sign. He did not command, did not acknowledge, did not reward. For all the Custodes could tell, their entire vigil might be unwitnessed by the very being it served. 10,000 years of perfect faithfulness kept for a master who could not perceive it. And yet they kept it. The not knowing did not weaken them. They guarded the Emperor as though he watched, served him as though he knew, held their faith through the silence as though it were answered, because the duty was the duty whether or not the god could see it kept. This is perhaps the purest form of faithfulness in all the grim galaxy of the 41st millennium. The Custodes had no reward, no recognition, no certainty that their service was even perceived. They had only the duty and the penance and the broken god in the silence, and they gave him everything. 10,000 years of perfect vigilance, the whole endless labor of the watch, asking nothing and receiving nothing, faithful to a master who could not answer. Whatever else the Custodes are, this is their glory and their sorrow, that they kept the longest and most thankless watch ever kept, and never once let it falter, guarding in silence a god who kept his own silence in return. The weight of long life. There is something in the nature of the Custodes that the long vigil pressed upon them with particular weight. They do not age, and so the 10,000 years were not, for them, a span filled by many generations, but a span lived through by warriors who endured across it. The Custodes do not age biologically. A custodian made in 1 century may still stand his watch 1,000 years later, unchanged. the same warrior keeping the same post across spans of time that would see whole human civilizations rise and fall. Some of the golden warriors of the long vigil were old, almost beyond reckoning. Veterans who had stood their watch for many centuries, who remembered ages that the rest of the Imperium knew only as history. They were living memory, the keepers of the Emperor and of the long continuity of the watch itself. Warriors who had personally held their posts across more years than most of the Imperium's worlds had existed. This long life gave the vigil a strange quality. For the Custodes, the 10,000 years were not an abstraction, not a span known only through records, but in part a lived experience, endured by warriors who were there for much of it. They watched the Imperium change around them across the centuries, saw it decay from the bright dream of the Great Crusade into the grim and brutal thing it became, witnessed the slow darkening of the human realm across ages they lived through. The Golden Warriors kept their watch as enduring beings who carried the memory of the long decline, rather than as brief generations succeeding one another, who had seen with their own eyes how far the Imperium had fallen from what the Emperor had meant it to be. And there is a custom that speaks to the weight of this long endurance. When a custodian comes at last to believe he is no longer fit for his duty, when the long ages have worn him past his usefulness, he does not retire to a quiet rest. He bequeaths his ornate armor to the great hall of names within the palace, and then he goes abroad into the galaxy, disguised beneath a hooded black cloak, to seek some final purpose or some quiet end, far from the watch he can no longer keep. The Golden Warriors who have endured too long pass out of the Order in this way, leaving their armor behind, walking out into the galaxy in morning black to meet whatever waits for them. It is a quiet echo of Valdor's own departure, the warrior who has reached the end of his vigil, walking away into the dark, leaving his goal behind. The rare stirrings. The long vigil was not wholly without event. A few times across the 10,000 years, the Custodes stirred from their watch, and these rare moments stand out against the stillness. During the War of the Beast, in the 32nd millennium, a great orc invasion brought ruin to the Imperium and carried the war all the way to the gates of Terra itself. The Custodes, bound by the Edict of Restraint, took little part in the sprawling conflict. But when a force of Eldari attempted to cut a path to the Emperor's throne room, amid the chaos and confusion, the Golden Warriors struck them down. They would not range out to fight the beast across the galaxy, but any threat that reached toward the throne itself met the Custodes, the keepers of the threshold defending the sacred way even in an age when they kept mostly to their watch. During the Age of Apostasy, in the 36th millennium, when the tyrant High Lord Goge Vandire ruled the Imperium through terror and madness, the Custodes stirred again. It was a custodian, Centurion Longinus, who brought the woman Alicia Dominica and her companions into the Emperor's presence, an act that became the catalyst for the fall of Vandire and the end of the Age of Apostasy. The Golden Warriors, who held the way to the Emperor, opened it at the crucial moment, and the bringing of Dominica before the throne changed the course of imperial history. Even in their withdrawal, the Custodes' control of the way to the Emperor gave them a quiet power over the fate of the Imperium. These stirrings were rare, and they share a common thread. The Custodes acted when the threat or the moment touched the Emperor himself, the throne, the sacred way. They did not range out to fight the Imperium's wars. They did not spend themselves on distant battlefields. But when something reached toward the throne, when the sacred access became the hinge of events, the Golden Warriors moved. For 10,000 years their watch held to this shape. Stillness almost always, and action only when the Emperor himself, or the way to him, was touched. The long vigil was a watch focused wholly on the one charge that mattered, the golden warriors stirring from their stillness only for the god they kept. Sleep well. Tomorrow we look closer at the inner life of the long vigil, the Hall of Names and the traditions of the Order, the world within the palace where the golden warriors kept their watch. Behind the walls of the imperial palace, across the 10,000 years of the long vigil, the Custodes lived a life that almost no one outside their order ever saw. It was a world of its own, the inner world of the Watchers of the Throne, a world of names earned in battle and inscribed in golden halls, of relics and traditions kept across the ages, of a brotherhood that was unlike any other in the Imperium. Tonight we step inside that hidden world, the inner life of the Golden Warriors, and see what it was to be one of the 10,000 across the long ages of the Watch. Tonight we sit with the Watchers of the Throne, in the hidden world behind the palace walls. The names they earned. Of all the traditions of the Custodes, the one that most reveals their nature is the awarding of names. A custodian is not content with a single name. As he serves, as he performs mighty deeds in the Emperor's service, he earns names, each one added to his title to mark a great act he has performed. A custodian's full name grows across his long life, accumulating with each deed, until the greatest of them carry names beyond counting. Constantin Valdor, the first of the 10,000, had earned over 1,900 names before the assault on Terra. By the 41st millennium, the book that recorded his full name took up an entire volume, a whole book given over to the deeds of a single warrior. These names are inscribed onto the inside of a custodian's armor, marks of honor, kept close to the warrior who earned them. They are kept within, on the inner surface of the auramite, hidden from the eyes of others, a private record of a life of deeds. A custodian carries his history with him, written inside the armor against his skin, the long list of his mighty acts held close and hidden, a personal account of a life spent in the Emperor's service. The names are between the warrior and his deeds, a record kept for its own sake rather than for the admiration of others. There is something in this custom that captures the whole spirit of the Custodes. They do not seek glory in the eyes of the galaxy. Their deeds are recorded inside their armor, not proclaimed to the worlds. Their greatest warrior's name fills a book that almost no one will ever read. The Custodes perform their mighty acts and earn their many names for the sake of the deeds themselves, for the service of the Emperor, not for the fame that might come of them. The names inscribed within the armor are the record of a faithfulness that asks no audience, a life of great deeds kept as a private account between the warrior, his brothers, and the god he serves. Consider the contrast with the rest of the Imperium, where glory is everything. The Space Marines are sung of across the galaxy, their chapters' deeds proclaimed in litany and legend, their heroes venerated by billions. The great heroes of the Imperial Guard are honored with medals and monuments. Across the human realm, mighty deeds are performed for the renown they bring, the fame a warrior earns the measure of his worth, and the Custodes, who perform deeds mightier than almost any, who are individually more powerful than the greatest heroes of the Astartes, write their glories on the inside of their armor where no one will see them. The most magnificent warriors in the Imperium are also the least known, their deeds hidden, their names unread, their glory turned inward and kept. This is the deepest expression of what the Custodes are. warriors who serve without the need to be seen serving, who perform without the need to be praised. The names earned and inscribed within the armor are a faithfulness complete in itself, needing no witness, asking no reward. The Custodes guard the Emperor and do great deeds in his name because that is what they were made for, because the duty is its own meaning, not because the galaxy will honor them for it. Their hidden names are the mark of a service so pure that it seeks no recognition at all, a glory kept secret because the glory was never the point, the deeds done for the Emperor and the Emperor alone. The Hall of Names. When a custodian falls or passes from the order, his memory is kept in a place that stands at the heart of their traditions, the Hall of Names. Within the Imperial Palace, the Custodes maintain the Great Hall of Names, where the armor and the memory of fallen and departed custodians are kept. When a custodian dies, or when he reaches the end of his usefulness and bequeaths his armor before going abroad into the galaxy, his auramite plate comes to the hall, joining the long ranks of those who served before him. The Hall of Names is the memory of the Order, the place where 10,000 years of golden warriors are remembered, the accumulated record of all who kept the watch across the ages. To walk the Hall of Names would be to walk through the whole history of the Custodes, rank upon rank of ornate armor, each suit the record of a warrior who guarded the Emperor, each one inscribed within with the names of the deeds that warrior performed. It is a place of memory and of mourning, a place where the long continuity of the watch is made visible, where the present Custodes can stand among the armor of all who came before them and feel the weight of the unbroken vigil. The hall holds the orders past, the proof that the watch has been kept without break across 10,000 years, the golden warriors of every age remembered in the place at the heart of their home. There is a poignant detail in the matter of the hall, and it concerns the greatest absence within it. The armor of Constantin Valdor, the first and greatest of the 10,000, never came to the Hall of Names. When Valdor vanished after the heresy, his weapons and his armor vanished with him, never making their way to the hall where the relics of the fallen are kept. The first of the Custodes, the one whose deeds filled a book, has no place among the remembered armor of his order. The Hall of Names holds the memory of all who kept the watch, save the one who founded it, the greatest of them all absent from the place of memory, his armor gone with him into the silence of his unknown fate. The absence of Valdor's armor is a wound in the Order's memory, and the Custodes feel it. The hall is meant to hold them all, the unbroken line of golden warriors from the first to the last, the complete record of the watch, and at its head there is a gap, the place where the founder's armor should stand left empty, the first of the 10,000 missing from the memory of the 10,000. Every custodian who walks the hall walks past that absence, the missing armor of the greatest of them, a reminder that even the Order's perfect continuity has a break at its very beginning, that the one who founded the watch did not remain to be remembered within it. It deepens the mystery that hangs over Valdor and through him, over the whole Order. Where did the first Captain General go, and why did he take his armor with him rather than leave it to the hall? The Custodes do not know. The greatest of them walked away into the dark with his gold, leaving no relic, no record, no place in the Hall of Names, only the memory of his deeds and the silence of his fate. The hall remembers 10,000 years of golden warriors, and at its head it holds an absence, the founder gone, the first watchkeeper unremembered in the place of remembrance, the mystery of his departure standing where his armor should stand. the brotherhood that is not a brotherhood. The Custodes are an order, but the bonds between them are unlike those of any other body of warriors in the Imperium, and the difference is revealing. The Space Marines are bound by brotherhood, the fierce loyalty of warriors who fight together as a single body, who depend on one another, who are forged into a unit by shared training and shared battle. The Custodes are different. Though they share a genetic kinship, they do not foster the same spirit of brotherhood that binds the Astartes together as a unit. Each custodian is, in a sense, complete in himself, a singular creation who does not need the bonds of a unit to function. They prepare and inspect their own equipment individually, each warrior tending his own arms rather than standing together on military parade. The individuality that runs through their making runs through their order as well. The Golden Warriors, a collection of singular beings more than a band of brothers. This reflects the truth of how they were made. Each custodian is a unique creation, crafted alone, a complete and singular masterwork. The Space Marines are made in their masses, bound together because they function together, because no single Astartes is meant to stand alone. The Custodes are made one at a time, each one whole, each one capable of standing alone, and so the bonds between them are looser, the order less a brotherhood than a gathering of individual perfections united by a shared purpose. They respect one another, decide much by the consensus of peers, but they do not lean on one another the way the Astartes do, each golden warrior sufficient unto himself. And yet, there is a unity among them, deeper than the camaraderie of a unit. The Custodes are bound by their shared purpose, their common devotion to the Emperor, the single duty for which they were all made. They do not need the brotherhood of the Astartes because they have something else, a shared dedication so total that it makes the bonds of a unit unnecessary. 10,000 individual perfections, each complete in himself, united by the single purpose that all of them serve, rather than by mutual dependence. The watch holds them together, the Emperor holds them together, the duty holds them together. They are a brotherhood of a stranger kind, bound by shared and absolute devotion to the God they keep, rather than by need. The faith and the doubt. Across the long vigil, the Custodes wrestled with a question that no other servants of the Emperor could face as they did, because no others stood so close to him. Was there a plan? The Imperium at large came to worship the Emperor as a god, the ecclesiarchy building a vast religion around him, the masses of humanity praying to the Master of mankind for salvation. The Custodes could not share that simple faith. They had known the Emperor when he lived, had stood beside him, had heard him forbid the worship of himself, and they had borne his broken body to the throne, had seen him struck down, had kept their vigil over a god who gave no sign. For the Custodes, the question of the Emperor was a matter of something harder than simple faith, a hope held against uncertainty, that the Master of mankind had foreseen all that befell him and planned for it, that there was purpose beneath the ruin. This was Valdor's own doubt, the one he carried in secret after the heresy, and it passed down through the order across the ages. The Custodes spent 10,000 years studying the Emperor's vision, contemplating his plan, seeking to understand what he had intended for mankind. And beneath that study lay the question they could never answer, whether the Emperor still guided events from his throne, whether his vast trapped mind still worked towards some great design, or whether he was merely a broken thing kept alive past his time. His plans ended with his wounding, his silence, the silence of a god who could no longer think at all. The Custodes hoped for the first. They feared the second, and they could not know which was true. This is part of what made the later Custodes more mystical than their rationalist forebears. The early Golden Warriors, made in the Emperor's rationalist dawn, would have sought a clear answer, a reasoned certainty. But 10,000 years of guarding a silent god, of keeping faith without sign or word, wore the rationalism into something more like religious devotion, a faith held in the absence of proof, a hope sustained against the silence. The Custodes became, across the long ages, keepers of a mystery they had learned to revere, guardians who served a god they hoped still guided them, but could not be sure even knew they were there. Their watch was an act of faith as much as duty, a hope held across 10,000 years that the silence on the throne held purpose rather than mere ruin. The world within the walls. All of this together made the inner life of the Custodes a world apart, hidden behind the walls of the palace across the long ages. It was a world of ritual and tradition, of names earned and inscribed, of armor remembered in the hall, of blood games played to keep the edge sharp, of study and contemplation across the long quiet years. It was a world that almost no one outside the Order ever saw, for the Custodes kept to the palace and the galaxy half forgot them. Within those walls, the Golden Warriors maintained a whole civilization of their own, a culture of vigilance and memory and devotion, sustained across 10,000 years in the keeping of a single sacred charge. The world within the walls was the world of the Watch, self-contained, ancient, hidden from the galaxy it had withdrawn from. There is a stillness to this world that is the stillness of the whole long vigil. The Custodes within the palace lived lives of discipline and ritual and quiet, their days given to the keeping of the watch, their long years passing in the service of the silent god. It was a life of constant readiness more than constant war, for war rarely came to the throne, a readiness held across ages, a vigilance and a devotion sustained through stillness. The world within the walls moved to the slow rhythm of the eternal watch, the Golden Warriors keeping their traditions and their discipline through ages in which the great drama was the absence of drama, the keeping of a vigil that, most of the time, nothing disturbed. And at the center of it all, always, was the Emperor. Every name earned, every deed performed, every tradition kept, every hour of the long watch turned upon the broken god at the heart of the palace. The world within the walls existed for him, the whole hidden civilization of the Custodes built around the single charge of guarding the throne. The names and the hall and the brotherhood and the rituals were all, in the end, expressions of the one purpose that defined them, the keeping of the Emperor, the guarding of the god, the vigil that gave their whole hidden world its meaning. They lived their secret life behind the walls for the sake of the silent presence at its center, the broken god whose keeping was the reason for everything they were. Sleep well. Tomorrow the long stillness ends, and we come to the years of madness and the breaking of the galaxy, when the great quiet of the watch gave way at last to a time of omens and danger. After 10,000 years of stillness, the long vigil began to break. As the 41st millennium drew toward its terrible close, strange omens gathered over Terra, cults stirred in the shadows of the throne world, and a creeping madness crept into the very heart of the Imperium's defense. These were the years of madness, the time of dread and danger that ended the long quiet of the watch. And out of that darkness rose a new Captain General, Trajann Valoris, who would lead the Custodes into the most transformative age since the heresy. Tonight we sit with the ending of the long stillness and the gathering storm that broke it. Tonight we sit with the years of madness when the long quiet ended and the golden warriors stirred toward war. The gathering omens. The years of madness began with strange portents, a creeping wrongness that settled over Terra and the custodes who guarded it. A time of strange omens and ominous whispers engulfed Terra, the lore tells us, a darkening of the spirit that crept through the throne world. It began with the disappearance of a captain general, the notoriously conservative Galahoth, who vanished, leaving the order without its head in a time of growing danger. And the dangers grew. The Custodes faced a shocking increase in cult activity throughout the Sol system, both heretical cults that worshipped the dark gods and the xenophile cults that looked to alien powers, a rising tide of corruption and treachery in the very heart of the Imperium. The madness reached even into the palace itself. Within the Emperor's own domain, doomsday sects triggered Q wars among the pilgrim tribes who crowded the palace, and the Custodes were forced to exercise their authority in the bloodiest fighting they had seen in centuries. In the dark cells, the hidden prisons beneath the palace, where the Imperium's most dangerous captives were held, the inmates grew agitated, a strange unease spreading among the imprisoned horrors. Support servitors had to be destroyed after they exhibited sudden violent madness. The wrongness was everywhere, creeping into every corner of the throne world, a darkness gathering at the heart of the Imperium. Worst of all, the corruption reached the Order's own seers. Among the Custodes were doomscryers, those who watched for threats to the Emperor through oracular arts, and possession was revealed among a subsect of them, the demonic creeping into the very ranks of those who watched for it. The false predictions of these fallen psychers sent a Captain General, Andros Lanchedre, to his death at the Battle of the Gilded Pyre, the leader of the 10,000 slain through the corruption of his own seers. The years of madness had struck at the heart of the Custodes themselves, killing their Captain General through the treachery of the corrupted, leaving the Order leaderless again in a time of spiraling danger. The rise of Trajann Valoris. It was into this climate of paranoia and danger that a new leader rose, the custodian who would transform the Order, Trajann Valoris. Trajann Valoris was elevated to command the 10,000 amid the chaos of the years of madness, becoming the 17th Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes. He was a being of formidable power and formidable will, spoken of as perhaps the deadliest individual warrior in the entire Imperium, his combat prowess approaching that of the Primarchs of old. He wore the ancient Castellan plate and wielded the Watcher's axe, and he carried the Moment Shackle, a mysterious relic of the dark age of technology whose powers were strange and not wholly understood. He was a warrior, a leader, and a thinker, and he came to power determined to set right what the years of madness had broken. Valoris wasted no time in regaining control. He moved at once to restore ironclad command over the defense of Terra, to purge the corruption that had crept into the throne world, to root out the cults and the possessed, and the madness that had spread through the Sol system. Under his command, the number of blood games greatly increased, the Custodes testing their defenses with new urgency, hunting the weaknesses that the years of madness had exposed. Long-hidden cults of the polar Terran underhives were purged. The defenses of the warp routes into the Sol system were strengthened. The new Captain General took the Order in hand and turned it, with all its formidable strength, against the gathering darkness. There is a mystery about Valoris that the lore preserves, and it fits the strangeness of the age. So little is recorded of him in the Imperial archives, so few details of his history and his rise, that no one can say how old he is. He might be 100 years old, or 5,000. He appeared, in a sense, out of the shadows of the Order's own secrecy, a warrior of unknown age and unknown history, elevated to command in the Imperium's hour of need. And the moment's shackle he carried, the relic of the Dark Age, may have given him a power stranger still, the ability, some say, to perceive what was coming, to predict the great changes that were about to break upon the Imperium, and to prepare the Custodes for them. The fall of Cadia. The years of madness were the prelude to a catastrophe that would break the galaxy in two. The fall of Cadia and the opening of the Great Rift. For 10,000 years, the fortress world of Cadia had held the Cadian Gate, the one stable passage out of the Eye of Terror, the great wound in reality from which the forces of chaos poured. Every Black Crusade, every great assault of the Dark Gods had to come through Cadia, and Cadia had always held. But in the 13th and greatest Black Crusade, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, Cadia fell at last. The fortress world was destroyed, the Cadian Gate broken open, the barrier that had contained the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years shattered. The consequence was catastrophe beyond reckoning. The Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, a vast tear in reality that split the galaxy in two, unleashing warp storms that cut whole regions off from the light of the Astronomicon and plunged half the Imperium into darkness. This was the moment the long vigil had been waiting for, in a sense, the great breaking that the stillness of 10,000 years had been a prelude to. The galaxy that the Custodes had withdrawn from, the Imperium they had guarded from afar by guarding its god, was tearing apart, and the breaking reached toward Terra itself. With the Great Rift open and the galaxy in chaos, the horrors of the warp pressed closer to the throne world than they had in 10,000 years. The darkness that the Custodes had kept their vigil against gathering at last for an assault on the heart of the Imperium. The Great Rift was the worst catastrophe to befall the Imperium since the heresy itself, and in some ways it was worse. The heresy had been a war, terrible but bounded, ended at last by the slaying of Horus. The Great Rift was a permanent wound in reality, a tear that would not close, splitting the galaxy in two and leaving half of it, the region called the Imperium Nihilus, cut off from the light of the Astronomicon and the guidance of Terra. Whole swathes of the human realm fell into darkness, beset by demons and cut off from aid, the Imperium itself broken nearly in half by the opening of the rift. The galaxy the Custodes had guarded their god through 10,000 years of decline now stood on the edge of final ruin. For the keepers of the throne, the Great Rift carried a particular dread. The Astronomicon, the great psychic beacon that guided the ships of the Imperium across the galaxy, was powered by the Emperor himself, sustained by the broken god on the throne the Custodes guarded. As the galaxy tore apart and the warp surged, the strain on the Emperor and on the throne that held him grew ever greater. The Custodes, who guarded the body of the Emperor, could see the toll the age was taking on the ancient machineries that sustained him, the golden throne failing by degrees, the systems that held their god at the threshold of death beginning to break down. The Great Rift was a deepening peril for the Emperor himself, the very god the Custodes existed to guard, his sustaining throne straining under the weight of an age of ruin. It was in this hour that Valoris's foresight, or his preparation, proved its worth. Whether through the moment shackle or his own strategic genius, Valoris had been quietly preparing the Custodes for war, readying the Order for a role it had not played in 10,000 years. He had even, the lore suggests, issued a summons for the reformation of the Sisters of Silence, the scattered other half of the Talons of the Emperor. years before they would be needed. The Captain General had seen, or sensed, that the long stillness was ending, that the age of the Watch was giving way to an age of war, and he had made the Golden Warriors ready for the storm that was about to break upon Terra, the return of a sun. Amid the catastrophe of the Great Rift came a thing the Custodes had not seen in 10,000 years, the return of one of the Emperor's own sons, Robert Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, who had ruled the Imperium in the aftermath of the heresy, and then been struck down and held for 10,000 years in stasis at the edge of death, was healed and restored. The Primarch returned, a living son of the Emperor, walking the galaxy once more, the first of his kind to do so in 10 millennia. He came at last to Terra, to the Imperial Palace, to the throne where his father sat broken. And the Custodes, who had guarded that throne across all the long ages, faced a moment unlike any in their history, the return of one who had known the Emperor as a living god, one of the few beings in the galaxy who could stand before the throne as something more than a supplicant. For the Custodes, Guilliman's return was a profound thing. They were the keepers of the Emperor, the wardens of the throne, and here came a Primarch, a son of the Emperor, returned from the edge of death to take up the defense of the Imperium. The Custodes permitted Guilliman to enter the Emperor's throne room alone, to stand before his father for an entire day, a privilege granted to almost no one across 10,000 years. What passed between the broken god and his returned son in that day, no one else knows. But the Custodes, the keepers of the threshold, opened the way for it, judging the returned Primarch worthy to stand alone before the Emperor he had not seen since the heresy. The return of Guilliman galvanized the Custodes. For 10,000 years they had kept their vigil in stillness, guarding a silent god, waiting for a purpose that never came. And now a son of the Emperor had returned, bringing with him a new energy, a new resolve, a sense that the long stillness might be ending and a new age beginning. The Golden Warriors, who had served in silence for so long, found in Guilliman's return a reason to stir, a living link to the Emperor they guarded, a son of their god come back to lead the Imperium in its darkest hour. The reappearance of a Primarch was a sign that the age of the Watch was passing, that the Custodes might soon be called to a role they had not played since the Emperor walked among them. The Battle of Lion's Gate. The storm broke at last in a demonic assault on Terra itself. The Battle of Lion's Gate, the first great war at the Emperor's door since the heresy. In the wake of the Great Rift, the forces of chaos came for Terra. A massive demonic incursion, the armies of Khorne the Blood God, assaulted the Imperial Palace, driving toward the Emperor at its heart in scenes that echoed the horror of the Siege of Terra 10,000 years before. 8 bloodthirsters, the greatest demons of Khorne, led the assault, a host of the blood god's savage butchers hurling themselves at the walls the Custodes guarded. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Golden Warriors faced a true assault on the throne, the thing they had kept their long vigil against, come at last to their door. The Custodes met them, and this time they did not fail. Led by Trajann Valoris, and alongside the newly returned Primarch Robert Guilliman and the reformed Sisters of Silence, the Custodes marched out to meet the demons before the walls of the palace. The Golden Warriors faced the blood god's butchers blade to blade, driven by a furious determination never to fail again, never to let the horror reach the Emperor as it had reached him in the heresy. One by one, the 8 bloodthirsters were blown apart or cut down. The demonic assault was broken. The Custodes held the palace, held the throne, held the Emperor safe. The failure of the Siege of Terra redeemed at last in the defense of Lion's Gate. But the cost was great. Noble defenders who had stood guard over the Emperor for thousands of years were brought low by the brazen weapons of Khorne's demons, golden warriors who had kept the watch across the long ages, falling at last in the defense of the throne. The Custodes won, but they paid in irreplaceable lives. The long-enduring guardians who had survived 10,000 years of vigil dying in the first great battle at the Emperor's door since the heresy. And the battle taught the Custodes a bitter lesson, one that would change them. They had nearly failed. The horror had reached the very walls of the palace, had come within reach of the Emperor, while the Custodes kept to their ancient restraint. The lesson of Lion's Gate was that the long vigil, the withdrawal, the keeping to terror, had let the darkness gather unchecked until it stood at the Emperor's door. This was the realization that would transform the Order. For 10,000 years, the Custodes had believed that the way to protect the Emperor was to stay close to him, to keep to terror, to guard the throne and nothing else. The Edict of Restraint had bound them to this, and they had kept it faithfully. But the Great Rift and the Battle of Lion's Gate revealed the flaw in that wisdom. By keeping to terror, by letting the galaxy's horrors gather unopposed, the Custodes had allowed the darkness to grow until it could assault the throne itself. The threat had come to the Emperor's door because the Custodes had waited at that door, rather than going out to meet the threat before it arrived. The strategy of 10,000 years, the patient withdrawal, had nearly cost them the Emperor. Many of the Custodes came to see this, and it stirred in them a desire to break the restraint that had bound them so long. They had failed the Emperor once at the Siege of Terra, and that failure had become their penance and their shame. Now they saw that their very strategy of guarding him, the long withdrawal to terror, had brought the horror to his door a second time. The lesson was clear, and it pointed toward a transformation, that to guard the Emperor in earnest, the Custodes might have to leave him, to go out into the galaxy and destroy the threats to him before they could gather at his door. The watch that had kept to terror for 10,000 years was about to be reconsidered, and the Golden Warriors were about to become something they had not been since the Great Crusade. Sleep well. Tomorrow, in the final part, the Custodes break the restraint of 10,000 years, and we see what the Golden Warriors become when at last they are unbound. Welcome back. This is the final part. Let everything slow. For 10,000 years, the Custodes kept to terror, bound by the Edict of Restraint, guarding the broken god while the galaxy burned beyond their walls. Now, at the close of the long vigil, that restraint is broken. The Golden Warriors, who had not gone to war in force since the heresy march out at last into the galaxy, the hand that had been bound for 10,000 years unbound at last. Tonight, in this final part, we follow the Custodes as they break their long restraint, as the talons of the Emperor are made whole again, as the Golden Warriors return to the stars they left so long ago, and we gather, at the end, what the 10,000 mean, the perfect guardians, the eternal penance, the golden light kept so long in the dark. Tonight, in this final part, we sit with the unbinding of the 10,000. The amending of the edict. The transformation of the Custodes came in the aftermath of Guilliman's return and the Battle of Lion's Gate, in a decision made behind closed doors. The reappearance of a son of the Emperor had galvanized the Custodes, and the Battle of Lion's Gate had taught them that their long restraint had let the darkness gather at the Emperor's door. And so, in private, Robert Guilliman and Captain General Trajann Valoris amended the Edict of Restraint, the decree that had bound the Custodes to Terra for 10,000 years. The restraint was loosened, the role of the Custodes reshaped. The Golden Warriors would no longer keep solely to Terra. Many of them would journey out across the galaxy on crusades, bringing war to the enemies of mankind, while a core of them, the Companions, remained behind to oversee the safety of the Emperor's mortal form. This was the most significant change in the Custodes since the heresy itself. For 10,000 years they had been a garrison of one world, the keepers of a single throne. Now they became, once more, a force that ranged the stars, the Golden Warriors returning to the galaxy they had withdrawn from so long ago. The edict that had defined their long vigil was set aside, and the Custodes took up a new role that was also their oldest, the role they had held in the Great Crusade before the heresy bound them to Terra. The hand that had been held back for 10,000 years was unbound, free to strike again at the enemies of the Emperor across the wider galaxy. The reasoning behind the change was the hard lesson of Lionsgate, expressed in a single grim realization. In an age of constant threat, the Custodes had come to understand that sometimes the best defense is found in attack. To guard the Emperor by keeping to Terra had let the horrors of the galaxy gather unopposed until they could assault the throne itself. To guard him better, the Custodes would go out to meet those horrors before they could reach his door, striking at the threats to the Emperor across the galaxy rather than waiting for them to arrive at Terra. The unbinding was a new strategy of guardianship, the Golden Warriors reasoning that the surest way to protect the Emperor was to destroy his enemies wherever they rose, before they could gather at his threshold. The Talons made whole. The unbinding of the Custodes came alongside the restoration of their ancient counterpart and the reunion of the two halves of the Talons of the Emperor. The Sisters of Silence, the left hand of the Emperor, had been shattered by the heresy and scattered across the galaxy, fading for 10,000 years into a marginalized remnant, mistrusted for their blank nature, operating from a few black ships without recognition or resupply. The bond between the Sisters and the Custodes had never wholly broken, the Golden Warriors alone continuing to support the Silent Sisters through the long ages of their decline. And when the years of madness came, it was Trajann Valoris who had secretly gathered the surviving sisters back to Terra, foreseeing the trouble that was coming, bringing the scattered remnant home in advance of the storm. After Guilliman's return, the restoration was made complete. The Primarch issued the Dispensatus Anathema, a decree commanding that the remaining strongholds of the Sisters of Silence be gathered and expanded, sending emissaries across the galaxy to find the lost sisters and summon them to Terra. He re-garrisoned the Somnus Citadel on Luna, the ancient home of the Order. And the sisters answered, gathering from their few remaining strongholds, until 3,000 of them had assembled at Terra, deployed as the Vigil Indomitus, the Silent Sisters restored to a strength they had not known in 10,000 years. With the Custodes unbound and the Sisters of Silence restored, the Talons of the Emperor were made whole again. The right hand and the left, the Golden Guardians and the Silent Sisters, the two orders that had stood together at the Emperor's side in the Great Crusade, were reunited for the first time since the heresy shattered them. The Talons that had closed against the warp in the dawn of the Imperium closed again, 10,000 years later, in its darkest age. The instrument the Emperor had made to guard himself against every threat, the Custodes against the physical and the Sisters against the psychic, was restored. the talons of the Emperor whole once more as the galaxy entered its time of greatest peril. Eti, into the galaxy. With the edict amended, the Custodes did what they had not done in 10,000 years. They went to war across the stars. More Custodes shield hosts than ever before struck out from Terra, ranging across the galaxy to hunt the most dangerous threats to the Emperor. A number of shield companies attached themselves to Guilliman's Adeptus Crusade, the great campaign to reclaim the Imperium from the chaos of the Great Rift. There they reprised their ancient role as the Emperor's emissaries, speaking with the authority of both Primarch and Emperor, bearing the new Primaris Space Marines and the technology of their creation to the beleaguered chapters of the Adeptus Custodes, ensuring that the Imperium understood this gift came from the master of mankind himself. The Golden Warriors, who had been half-forgotten legends, became, once more, a presence in the galaxy, fighting in the Great War for the Imperium's survival. The Custodes carried their war into the darkness beyond the Great Rift, even into the shadow of the Imperium Nihilus, the half of the galaxy cut off from the light of the Astronomicon. Wherever the most deadly threats to the Emperor arose, the Golden Warriors went to destroy them, ranging across a galaxy they had not walked in force for 10 millennia. And in time came the Fourth Tyrannic War, the great new horror of Hive Fleet Leviathan uncoiling across the galaxy, and the Custodes took the field against it, Trajann Valoris leading his Soulblade fleet from his flagship, the Manifest Judgment, into the war against the devouring swarm. The Golden Warriors, unbound at last, fought across the galaxy in the Imperium's darkest hour. The perfect guardians returned to the stars. Yet through all of it, one thing never changed. Their focus remained always the sanctity of Terra and the Emperor at its heart. The Custodes did not range the galaxy for conquest or glory or the love of war. They ranged it to guard the Emperor, to destroy his enemies before they could reach his throne. The whole purpose of their crusades still the protection of the broken god on Terra. Even unbound, even ranging across the galaxy, the Custodes remained what they had always been, the guardians of the Emperor, the keepers of his sanctity, their every battle in the distant dark still serving the single duty for which they were made. The hand was unbound, but it was still the Emperor's hand, striking now across the galaxy in the service it had always kept. And the unbinding was never total. Even as the shield host struck out into the galaxy, a core of the Custodes remained at Terra, the companions, charged with the safety of the Emperor's mortal form. The throne was never left unguarded. The Golden Warriors who marched to war did so, while their brothers kept the ancient vigil at the Emperor's side, the two halves of the order serving the same purpose in different ways, some guarding the Emperor by keeping his throne, and some guarding him by destroying his enemies across the stars. The unbinding did not abandon the watch. It extended it, the Custodes now guarding the Emperor both at his throne and across the whole galaxy. The vigil at Terra unbroken even as the war ranged outward. This is the balance the amended edict struck, and it shows the wisdom in it. To keep holy to Terra had let the darkness gather at the Emperor's door. To abandon Terra wholly would have left the throne unguarded, the very thing the Custodes existed to prevent. And so they did both, kept the companions at the throne, sent the shield host to the stars, guarded the Emperor at the center, and struck at his enemies across the galaxy. The hand was unbound without letting go of the thing it had always held. The Custodes reaching out into the galaxy, while never loosening their grip on the broken god at the heart of it all. The meaning of the unbinding. There is a question at the heart of the unbinding that touches the deepest meaning of the Custodes, and it is worth sitting with as we near the end. For 10,000 years the Custodes guarded a broken god who could not speak, kept a vigil over a body on a throne, withdrawn from the galaxy into the silent keeping of a single charge. It was a guardianship that had become, in a sense, a long mourning. The golden warriors made to protect a living emperor reduced to the keepers of his tomb. And the unbinding changed that. The Custodes who march out into the galaxy are no longer only the mourners of a broken god. They are warriors again, striking at the enemies of mankind, acting in the galaxy, fulfilling once more the active purpose for which they were first made. The unbinding gave the Custodes back their purpose, turned the keepers of a tomb back into the warriors of a living cause. And yet the question remains, the same question that has haunted the Custodes since the heresy. Is there a plan? Do the Custodes go out into the galaxy because the Emperor wills it, because his vast trapped mind still guides the Imperium towards some great design? Or do they go because a Primarch and a Captain General decided it, because the Custodes themselves chose to reinterpret their duty in an age of crisis? The Emperor gave no command. He cannot. The unbinding was the decision of Guilliman and Valoris, made behind closed doors, not a word from the silent god on the throne. The Custodes act as they have always acted, in the hope that their service aligns with the Emperor's will, without the certainty that it does, guardians serving a god whose wishes they can only infer. This is the abiding mystery of the Custodes, and the unbinding does not resolve it. Whether they keep to Terra or range the galaxy, whether they guard the throne in stillness or strike at the Emperor's enemies across the stars, they serve a god who gives no sign, act on a purpose they cannot confirm, keep faith with a master whose will is a matter of hope rather than knowledge. The unbinding freed their hands, but it did not break their silence, the silence of the god they serve. They remain what they have always been since the heresy, the faithful guardians of a broken god, serving with absolute devotion a master who cannot tell them whether their service is what he wished. There is a courage in this that is easy to miss beneath the gold and the might. To serve a god who answers is one thing. To serve a god who has fallen silent, who may not perceive you, who can give no command and no thanks, and to serve him for 10,000 years with undimmed devotion, asking nothing, certain of nothing, is a faithfulness of a rarer and harder kind. The Custodes do not have the comfort of the masses, who pray and believe themselves heard. They have only the duty, the memory of the living Emperor they knew, and the hope, held against all the silence, that the broken god still wills what they do. And on that hope, never confirmed, they have built 10,000 years of perfect service, and now a return to the stars in his name. What the 10,000 mean? So we come to the end, and to the meaning of the Golden Warriors, the Adeptus Custodes, the 10,000. They were the Emperor's first sons, made before all the rest, crafted one by his own hand to guard him. They were the most perfect warriors mankind ever made, golden demigods of unmatched might, each one irreplaceable, each one a masterwork of the Emperor's craft. They guarded a living god through the golden age of the Great Crusade, and they failed to save him at the Siege of Terra, and they bore his broken body to the golden throne, and swore a penitent's oath to guard it for the rest of time. And for 10,000 years they kept that oath, in silence, in stillness, without reward or recognition, the longest and most faithful vigil ever kept, guarding a god who could not thank them, serving out of duty and out of penance through the long decline of the Imperium they had withdrawn from. That is the heart of what the Custodes mean. A faithfulness beyond reason. A devotion that asks nothing and endures everything. They are the warriors who keep their watch over a god who gives no sign, who serve without certainty that their service is even perceived, who hold their faith through 10,000 years of silence, because the duty is the duty whether or not the god can see it kept. In a galaxy of fanatics who worship a god they have never known, the Custodes are the ones who knew him, who stood beside him, who saw him fall, and who guard him still, out of a loyalty that survived even the breaking of the one they loved, never out of blind faith. They are the keepers of the longest hope in the galaxy, the hope that beneath the silence of the broken god there is still purpose, still a plan, still the master of mankind they were made to serve. And there is a sorrow at the center of them that gives them their power as a story. The Custodes were made to guard a living god, and they have spent almost the whole of their existence guarding his corpse that will not die. The Golden Warriors, crafted in hope and ambition at the dawn of the Imperium, became the silent watchers of a tomb, the keepers of a vigil over a body on a throne, the mourners of a god who could neither live nor die. They are the most magnificent beings mankind ever made, and they have spent 10,000 years in the keeping of a single broken form, their perfection bent wholly to a guardianship that became a mourning. The golden light kept in the dark, the perfect guardians of a fallen god, the 10,000 who have kept their faith through the longest night, waiting always for a dawn that has not come. This has been the entire timeline of the Adeptus Custodes, the Golden Legion, the Brotherhood of Demigods, the 10,000, the first sons of the Emperor, made to guard him and unable to save him, the keepers of the longest vigil, faithful through 10,000 years of silence, the hand unbound at last, returning to the galaxy in the Imperium's darkest hour, guarding still in stillness and in war, the broken god at the heart of all they are, told slowly, for the quiet between waking and whatever waits in the dark. Good night.